The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. My aunt had hand-addressed the envelope in her loopy cursive, the kind she only used for occasions she considered important. Inside was a card printed on heavy cream stock, the kind of paper that costs more than it should, announcing my cousin's engagement party at my aunt and uncle's house in Oakville. Saturday 3 weeks away, cocktail attire, RSVP by the 15th. I stood in the hallway of my apartment in Hamilton and read it twice. Then I set it on the kitchen counter and didn't look at it again for 4 days. I should explain something about my family. My mother's sister, my aunt, married well. That's how my grandmother always put it, with a little nod that said everything. My uncle built a commercial real estate business in the 90s when the timing was right and the market rewarded people who moved fast. They had a house in Oakville with a 3-car garage and a finished basement that was bigger than my entire apartment. My aunt wore the kind of effortless linen that looks cheap, but isn't. My mother did not marry well, by that same measuring stick. She married my father, who was kind and inconsistent in equal measure, who worked in HVAC and sometimes worked very hard and sometimes didn't work at all. He died when I was 19, heart attack, unexpected, in the driveway of a client's house in Stony Creek. He was 44. After that, my mother moved back in with my grandmother in her house in Burlington, and I finished my degree at McMaster while working at a coffee shop on King Street, and I graduated with $31,000 in student debt and a degree in communications that I was not sure what to do with. I eventually found work at a mid-sized marketing firm downtown. The pay was decent. Not Oakville decent, but decent. The point is, at family events, I was always aware of the distance between my side of the family and my aunt's side. It wasn't something anyone said directly. It was in the way my aunt would ask about my little job with her head tilted slightly, or the way my cousin would mention a trip to Portugal and then catch herself and say, "Sorry, I know you're saving up," when I had said nothing about saving up for anything. My grandmother noticed all of it. She never said so, but I knew she did. She had that specific quality that some older women develop. The ability to observe everything and say very little, so that when she did speak, it landed. She was 79 and lived alone and drove herself to her own appointments and called me every Sunday at 11. She had been a bookkeeper for 40 years and had the kind of mind that quietly tallied everything. The engagement party was for my cousin, my aunt's daughter, who was 28 and engaged to a man named Trevor who worked in finance in Toronto and already owned a condo in Liberty Village. My cousin was lovely, honestly. We had never been close, but I didn't dislike her. She existed in a different atmosphere than me, that was all. I RSVP'd yes. I don't know why. Some combination of guilt and not wanting to give my aunt the satisfaction of my absence. I drove out to Oakville on the Saturday afternoon. It was April, that specific kind of April in Ontario where it keeps pretending to be spring and then changes its mind. I wore a green dress I'd bought at a sample sale 2 years ago and told myself looked good, which it did, but I knew my aunt would find a way to make me feel like it didn't. I arrived at 5:30, half an hour after the start time, because I'd learned years ago that arriving on time to my aunt's events meant being put to work carrying platters. There were already a dozen cars in the driveway and along the street. Inside, the house smelled like fresh flowers and something catered. My aunt met me near the door. "You came," she said, which was already an odd thing to say to someone you'd invited. She looked me up and down once, very quickly, the way she always did, as if cataloging me, and then kissed my cheek and moved on to greet someone else. I found my mother near the kitchen, holding a glass of white wine and looking like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. We hugged. She whispered that the shrimp was good and to try it before it ran out. I got a glass of wine and stood with her for a while and pretended to be perfectly comfortable, which is a skill I have honed over many years of this exact situation. The party was everything you would expect. Trevor's family was there, louder and more confident than ours. My aunt circulated with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this. My uncle told the same 3 stories he always told at parties. My cousin floated around in a pale yellow dress looking genuinely happy, which I was glad about, whatever else was happening. About an hour in, my aunt found me by the dining room table. "I need to talk to you about something," she said, "and I hope you'll take it the right way. I want to tell you that I had some premonition in that moment." I didn't. I just thought she was going to say something about my dress. "Your grandmother," she said, "has been making some financial decisions lately, and I think it's important that the family is on the same page about it." I waited. "She's been transferring money. Significant amounts. And I know you two are close, and I just want to make sure, I'm saying this gently, that she's not being taken advantage of, that someone isn't influencing her. The word someone was doing a lot of work in that sentence. I understood what she was saying. She was saying me. She was saying that she suspected I was manipulating my grandmother into giving me money. I remember thinking, this is happening at a party. She is saying this to me at her daughter's engagement party, with canapes on the table 3 feet away. I don't know what you mean, I said, which was true, and also buying time. Grandma told me she updated her will recently, my aunt said, and made some transfers. I just want to make sure she's thinking clearly, that it's coming from her and not from influence. She said it so pleasantly. That was the thing. Her voice was warm and concerned. You should talk to her, I said. If you're worried about her mental state, talk to her. I'm talking to you. I know. I said, that's interesting, and I excused myself and went to find the shrimp. I was standing by the back windows with a plate I wasn't eating from when my uncle found me. My uncle was a big, affable man who was not malicious the way my aunt could be, but who went along with things, which was its own kind of problem. Your aunt worries, he said, in the tone of a man who has used this sentence to explain many things over many years. I know she does. She just loves your grandmother, I know. And the transfers, we didn't know about them. We would have expected to be consulted. And there it was. That was the real thing. Not concern for my grandmother's mental state. Concern about the will. Concern about the transfers. Concern that whatever my grandmother had been doing with her own money might not be routing toward them. She's 79, I said. Not 99. She balances her own accounts. She drives herself to her own appointments. If she's making financial decisions, they're her financial decisions. My uncle made a face that was not agreement but wasn't argument either. He refilled his drink and went back to Trevor's father, and they talked about the Leafs. I stayed another 40 minutes because I didn't want my leaving to be a thing that got discussed. I said goodbye to my cousin, who hugged me genuinely and said we should get coffee soon, and I believed she meant it. I said goodbye to my mother, who squeezed my hand. I did not say goodbye to my aunt. I drove home on the QEW with the window cracked even though it was cold, because I needed the air. I called my grandmother when I got back to Hamilton. How was the party? She asked. Fine, I said. The shrimp was good. A pause. What did she say to you? She always knew. She said she was worried about you making financial decisions without the family knowing. Another pause, this one longer. I see. She made it sound like she thought I was influencing you. Yes, my grandmother said. I imagine she did. She didn't sound surprised. She didn't sound upset. She sounded like someone who had been watching a slow-moving thing move and had simply been waiting for it to arrive. I want to see you this week, she said. Come for dinner, Wednesday. I drove to Burlington on Wednesday evening. My grandmother made beef stew from scratch, the kind with the tiny pearl onions that take forever to peel. We ate at her kitchen table the way we always did, with the small TV on the counter showing the news on low. After dinner, she made tea, and we sat in her living room and she told me things. She had, in fact, updated her will. She had done it in January with her own lawyer, a woman she had used for years, not the same firm my uncle used. And she had made the changes she wanted to make. She had also made several transfers over the past year into a registered account in my name, into my mother's name, and into a GIC she'd opened jointly with me that I hadn't known about until that evening. The total amount was not something I will write down here because it doesn't matter, and because it was more than I had ever expected, and because I sat there at her kitchen table and couldn't speak for a moment. I've watched how you've managed, she said. Since your father died, I watched you finish school and pay your debts and build something real with very little. I've watched your mother do the same. You didn't have to. I know I didn't have to. I wanted to. It's my money. I earned every dollar of it in 40 years of keeping other people's books, and I am going to decide where it goes. She said it simply, without heat. She was not performing. This was just true, and she was saying it. My sister is going to be very unhappy, I said. I expect so. She's going to say you weren't thinking clearly, that I manipulated you. I expect she'll say that too. Doesn't that bother you? My grandmother looked at me for a moment. She had the same eyes as my mother but used them differently, more direct, less apologetic. When I was 31, she said, your grandfather got very sick. We had 2 children. I took a part-time bookkeeping job and then a full-time one, and then I built a client list, and I kept this family going for the better part of 2 years while he recovered. No one asked me if I was making good decisions. No one asked if I needed to be consulted. I just did it. She paused. I have been making my own decisions for 50 years. I don't need to start asking permission now. I nodded. I didn't trust myself to say anything. Your aunt has a good life, she said. I'm not punishing her, but she's had advantages. You've had a different road. So has your mother. And I love you both, and this is what I want to do. We stayed up until 10:30 talking about other things. A book she'd read, my work, the strange bird that kept appearing at her feeder. I drove home at 11 and cried for about 10 minutes on the 403, not from sadness, but from some emotion that didn't have a clean name. The call from my aunt came 4 days later. I was at my desk at work when my phone buzzed. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the voicemail on my lunch break. She had spoken to my grandmother's lawyer. She had spoken to her own lawyer. She had done some research and was very concerned about undue influence and felt there were grounds to question the transfers and the will. Her voice was calm and precise and cold in a way her party voice had not been. I called my grandmother. She called her own lawyer, I said. I know. She called me first. Are you okay? Perfectly fine, my grandmother said, and she sounded it. My lawyer anticipated this might happen. We were careful and thorough, specifically because we knew someone might make a fuss. Someone, again, that word. What does that mean, thorough? It means I was assessed, voluntarily, proactively. Cognitive capacity assessment, full documentation, everything my lawyer recommended. Everything is clean and clear and properly filed. I sat on a bench outside my office building and tried to process this. My grandmother had thought ahead. She had known my aunt well enough to predict that this moment would come, and she had built a foundation under her own decision so solid that nothing could crack it. She can still make noise, I said. She can, my grandmother agreed, but noise isn't the same as a legal challenge, and a legal challenge she cannot win. She said it so calmly, so completely without performance. I don't want you to have to deal with this, I said. Sweetheart, she said. I dealt with 2 years of terror when your grandfather was sick and no one offered to help. I dealt with your mother calling me in pieces after your father died. I dealt with 40 years of small indignities in an era when women who worked were still something to tolerate. I can deal with my sister's daughter being unhappy that I gave my own money to whoever I wanted to give it to. There was a long pause. The thing that bothers your aunt, she said, is not that she needs the money. She doesn't. The thing that bothers her is that she assumed she knew how this would go, and it's not going that way. That's a pride problem, not a money problem. And I'm sorry about it, but I'm not going to rearrange my life to solve someone else's pride problem. I went back inside and sat at my desk and didn't do very much work for the rest of the afternoon. The weeks after that were uncomfortable in the way that family tension is always uncomfortable. Not loud, mostly, but present. My aunt did not call me directly again. My mother told me she'd received a text from my aunt that was civil on the surface and clearly furious underneath. My cousin texted me separately to say she was sorry and didn't know what to say, which I appreciated. My grandmother's lawyer sent a formal response to my aunt's lawyer. The response was thorough and apparently conclusive because the legal inquiry did not advance beyond that initial letter. My aunt and uncle stopped calling my grandmother on Sundays. I only know this because my grandmother mentioned it once, in passing without evident distress. Your aunt and I are taking a break from each other, she said. It's probably needed. What I noticed, in the months that followed, was how little my grandmother seemed to shrink. She continued her Sunday calls with me. She continued driving to her own appointments. She continued having the neighbor's dog over on Thursday afternoons because she liked the company. She had made her decisions and documented them and filed them properly, and she was simply living her life, and she did not appear to be asking anyone's concessions for any of it. In June, she took my mother and me to dinner at a restaurant in Burlington that she'd been wanting to try, the kind with cloth napkins and a seasonal menu and a wine list that the server actually explained. We sat there for nearly 3 hours. My grandmother had the salmon and 2 glasses of Pinot Gris and talked about a documentary she'd watched about ocean tides, and my mother laughed more than I had heard her laugh in months. At the end of dinner, my grandmother looked at us both over the table and said, "I want you to know that this is exactly what I wanted to do. I made good decisions, and I'm not sorry." She wasn't performing the way I said before. She was just telling us the truth. Driving home, my mother called me from her own car. We'd driven separately, and she was crying gently, the kind of crying that isn't sad. "She's something else," my mother said. "She is," I said. "I feel like I can breathe." I knew what she meant. There is a specific weight that comes from years of being looked at with that slight tilt of the head, being spoken to in that tone that measures you and finds you wanting. It is not a renounce itself. It just sits there, accumulating until someone, one clear, deliberate, documented person, decides that it is over. We did not go to my cousin's wedding in September. My grandmother sent a gift. I sent a card. My mother sent flowers. My aunt did not acknowledge any of it. I don't think about her very often, to be honest. I think about my grandmother, who called me last Sunday at 11, the way she always does. I think about the fact that there is now a GIC in my name that I could not have imagined 2 years ago, and that I am paying off what remains of my student debt, and that I feel for the first time in a long time like the ground under me is solid. I think about what my grandmother said about having made good decisions. Not as a flex, not as a victory speech, just as a fact, clearly and plainly stated, by a woman who earned every bit of what she had and knew exactly what she wanted to do with it. She was not interested in anyone's approval, and eventually, watching her, I learned that I wasn't either.